Well, hey guys, so excited to be back. Took a week off, had a lot going on at the church. We had an outreach event that was absolutely amazing. It was so awesome, but it is good to be back in the chair, making some videos, reacting to some things, giving you thoughts on some stuff. I've actually got a video coming here real soon all about outreach and just my personal philosophy on what the church should be doing. We'll look at some scripture in that as well. And so super excited about some of the videos that are coming out. I wanted to take some time today to respond to a video that I saw go viral because it actually got blocked off of the air on TV and was only available on YouTube. And of course, I'm talking about the interview on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert with Representative James Talarico. And he is the congressman or senator. I can't remember. But anyway, he's running for one of the seats in the Texas legislature and to represent them. And so thought it was really interesting, especially because he is a very devout Christian. He bases a lot of what he says in Christian policies and, kind of his version of Christianity. We'll get into this in just a little bit, but he is a Democrat. And so that's very unconventional to be claiming Jesus while also being in that party. And so it's really interesting. Wanted to take a look at one of his responses that Stephen Colbert gave to the questions and just see what he's really saying here. So let's go ahead and just respond to this part of the interview here.
Or any religious organization to associate themselves from a political party. Right. How must it diminish God to be associated with something so small as a present political party?
That's right.
Because imagine this. Imagine that you managed to co-opt Christianity. Imagine if you managed to convince everybody that Jesus was on your side. If you then lose the election, sounds like you've got a pretty weak Jesus.
Yeah.
So before he gets into this, I actually agree with a lot of what Stephen Colbert says here. I think that it is incredibly minimalistic. It minimizes God to put him in a political party. And especially when people try to co-opt him. I remember this during the 2016, the 2020, and the 2024 election where people were praying for God to install President Trump into office. And I watched as people's faith was shaken because how could God allow him to lose in 2020 and allow for somebody else to come in? So even if you don't think the election was stolen, that how could God allow for another person to sit in that seat? And I remember it really rocked people's core. And I just believe God is so much bigger than political parties. But I want to get into the response that he has here.
Exactly right. And that's the key is you don't want to fit the big thing into the small thing. Mm-hmm. And God is the biggest thing there is. And so to try to fit God into a political party, whether it's the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, you've got it reversed. And so it's why I think we have to remember to put those big things first, to put the love of God and the love for our neighbors before anything else. Because right now, what you've got is people baptizing their partisanship and calling that Christianity, when in reality, your politics should grow out of your faith, not the other way around.
Now,
so this response to me is a little coded. And we'll go a little bit earlier in the video. I've got to scrub around and find it. But we will go a little bit earlier in this interview where he's talking about why his politics are birthed out of his faith. And I think that it is correct that your politics should be informed by your faith, that you cannot claim either party in your faith. I agree with that. However, we're going to kind of dissect one of his other answers and take a look at just why it's not, the reason why I call it coded is because it's not as simple. It's not like that is what he is even doing here. And so that's going to be kind of interesting. Let's take a look at this other clip from earlier in the interview.
Political movement, that is the perfect description for it. They convinced a lot of our fellow Christians that the most important issues were abortion and gay marriage. Two issues that aren't mentioned in the Bible, two issues that Jesus never talked about. Jesus
Are we sure about that, James? Are we sure that Jesus never talked about these things? Because while, yes, abortion is not talked about in terms of do not abort your babies or do not do this, we have plenty of scripture that talks about the importance of life, the sanctity of life, the uniqueness of life. And so while it doesn't mention abortion specifically, and I know there's some even progressives who like to use the Old Testament in Leviticus where it says that if a woman had a child out of wedlock or had a baby, got pregnant, while another man was married, that they should drink the bitter water. I know that that is alluding to this thing. That's really not even what that is about. But I mean, are we sure that Jesus doesn't talk about life? Are we positive of that? Because I'm not seeing that that is not discussed at all elsewhere in Scripture. Now, does it use a 2026 political landscape as the backdrop of talking about these issues? Absolutely not. That would be absurd. But to also say that Jesus doesn't talk about the sanctity of life and the protection of it and the uniqueness of it and all of those things is a little crazy. Same goes for gay marriage and the broader, identity kind of conversation happening right now, transgenderism, same-sex attraction, marriage, all of these things. Is it explicitly talked about and mentioned? There are some people who would like to say, yes, it's all over Scripture. We could talk about the different translations and all of those things. I still hold that, yes, while the translations aren't necessarily perfect one-to-one things, that it is talking about this stuff. But even scrapping all of that, Jesus is very, very clear. The Bible is very, very clear on what kinds of marriages God does bless and the ideal the way that he created, the created order in which he did things. We know this from Genesis. We see it affirmed by Jesus in his teachings in the New Testament. He is not here to buck the system. Jesus did not come to say, yeah, all that stuff about marriages and all that stuff, that doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. That's not what God really is concerned with. No. There is a clear intentionality between marriage being a man and a wife. We see the parallels between Christ and the church and all of these things. So to say that these issues aren't talked about in Scripture is being dishonest at the best and being deceitful at its worst. So I really struggle when that is kind of the context that leads to that earlier clip that we saw. Let's see what else he has to say here.
In Matthew 25 tells us exactly how you and I and every one of our fellow believers, how we're going to be judged and how we're going to be saved. By feeding the hungry, by healing the sick, by welcoming the stranger. Nothing about going to church, nothing about voting Republican. It was all about how you treat other people. Don't.
And he gets an applause and he continues. That's really the gist of what he's trying to say here. Again, Matthew 25, yes, Jesus is talking about being compassionate. He's talking about loving others. He's talking about being there for those who are in need. Absolutely. But what do you do with a passage like John 8, where the woman is caught in the middle of adultery and Jesus comes and he does defend her and he says, anyone who's around here that has is without sin can cast the first stone. Well, obviously the crowd starts to disperse because nobody does not have sin in their life. There's not anyone who can make that claim other than Jesus. But when he is looking at this woman, when he helps her off of the ground, he says, do you see anyone who's condemned you? She says, no, I see no one. And he says, then go and sin no more. And I think what James, again, the reason why I say it's coded is because I feel like in the same way that he is looking at conservatives and Republicans as co-opting Christianity, putting their politics into view of what Jesus came to do, I feel like he's actually doing the same thing, just on the opposite side of the aisle, because these sound exactly like Democratic platformed talking points and political positions. They don't really sound, there are justifications in Jesus, but like I said, those ties are very, very similar to what he's claiming in Christian nationalism. To me, that is the problem. That is the issue. Now, Can you look at one and say one has done more damage, or one has more of a broad scope and one is a little bit more niche, and there's not a whole lot of progressive churches, and progressive churches are actually kind of dying out and all this stuff? Yes, absolutely. We could talk about the scale being different. But when it comes to the motive and the heart behind it, I feel like this is the exact same thing. And I feel like it's being very, again, deceitful, or at the very least being dishonest, to sit and say, I have the correct teachings of Jesus. Because what you're doing is looking at the other side of the aisle and saying, you don't have the correct teachings of Jesus, but I do, which is ultimately what Christian nationalists do as well. And so then you end up in this big talking circle where everything is just, opposite-ism. It's the same thing, but just flipped and given a different face. And that's what I feel like is happening here. And I'm not even saying that some of the conversations and some of the things that they say are all that bad, but I would look at a Christian nationalist and say that there are some of the teachings and some of their positions that aren't that bad either. And so I think this is, it's muddying the waters even more for people. And I think we really do have to go back to the word, back to scripture, to see that Jesus really didn't fit in a political party. And if he really didn't fit in a political party, why is this guy running as a Democrat? Run as an independent. Like, if you're that principled about your faith, then you should, be an independent, in my opinion. And so to me, it's really, really difficult to see this stuff as just opposite, or as as a different view of Jesus, as opposed to just being the opposite of Christian nationalism. This Christian progressive movement is really trying to hijack a lot of the same things that Christian nationalists have also been trying to hijack as well. And so I have problems with both. Let me know your thoughts. Where do you stand on the aisle? Where are you at with this stuff? Do you think that there is any agreement that can be had between Christian progressives, Christian nationalists? Can we come together and actually be united around the banner of Jesus? Do you think that's even possible? Or are these two things not even real faith, genuine faith at all? Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear from you. See you in the next video. Peace.